Kelly Style, your State Farm insurance agent in Oskaloosa, is excited to be serving the Mahaska County community and the surrounding area. See Kelly at 309 High Avenue E, Oskaloosa, or call 641-673-0088.
Welcome to this edition of Morgan You Asked For podcast. Kind of half a day late here. It is Thursday morning, April 4th. Just schedules and everything. As we talked, schedules happen. This is going to be a Caitlin Clark episode, but just to get out of the way first, we do just want to touch men's basketball real quick. It has been a full week tonight since Iowa State did lose to Illinois in not their best game. Now, they made it interesting and just couldn't get over the hump. But overall, Iowa State did not play their best. Illinois had something to do with that. Illinois' defense was a lot better than I anticipated on Iowa State, and Iowa State missed some shots. But overall, as we talked, successful year for Iowa State getting to the Sweet 16, but not an exceptional year. It's where they should have went, but they didn't go any farther than maybe what they should have went with way. They were ranked number 4 AP at the end of the year, and they've been in that 10-12 range most of the year.
I agree with you. Illinois' defense was better than I expected as well. And then, as you said, Iowa State missed 3 or 4 shots down low a couple real easy ones too that could have gotten back in the game, and that was really the difference. But still a pretty good year for Iowa State. Getting to the Sweet 16 is really tough in the men's side, as we've talked about before. And they just weren't able to close that gap.
Absolutely. And really, we're going to touch the Final Four real quick. Really, some of the best teams are there. Purdue, UConn, probably the 2 best teams throughout the entire year. And then Alabama and NC State. Let's just quick pick your predictions. I'm going to say it's Purdue and UConn wins it. I know that's shock, but I do think those are the best 2 teams.
I'm right there with you. I think it's going to be Purdue and UConn. I mean, can Zach Edey be enough of a game changer in that championship game if they were to play each other to take down UConn? Maybe, but UConn does seem like the best team by far.
Yeah. And then just transfer portal, Iowa State signed a guy from UNI, signed a guy from Charlotte, and they're in on a bunch of other guys. They are, 4 guys left, and they're bringing 3 or 4 guys in that are just as good, if not better. I expect them to be right back where they were next year, very close to the same top 10, top 12. If you play really well, get up into that top 5 next year. As long as there aren't any other transfer portal happenings, which I'm never going to say never. As of right now, none of the key guys are leaving, but you never know.
Yeah, the transfer portal is something that we have to pay attention to basically 24/7. Now, you do a much better job than that than I do. For me, it's just too much between NFL and some other stuff that I hadn't been interested in. But yeah, it's definitely a full-time job just keeping track of that just in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it is. There's over 1,000 players in it. Every team has 3. I mean, there's nothing you can do to keep players now. Like Omaha Baloo. I think if he stays at Iowa State, I even think he liked it at Iowa State. There was nothing wrong with Iowa State. But it is simply, and I think Coach Otzelberger and I think a lot of coaches are just very truthful with the players that we are recruiting over you. You are more than welcome to stay, but there is no guarantee you play unless you get a lot better. And even if you get a lot better, we're going to try to recruit better players than you. And it's just not, this may not be it for you. I mean, not necessarily that they're kicking them out, but they're definitely nudging them out the door.
Yeah, it's a turntable. I mean, nonstop. I saw Iowa State women. I think one of their bench players or something enter the portal. I forget her name, but
a good freshman. I mean, and she played really well against Stanford. She hadn't had a big role, but just the way it played a little bit different. They're bigger. She was a 6 foot tall guard forward. Bright future, but again, didn't see her role, and she's gonna. And the other thing is it's about money too. They can only play so many years, and Iowa State's going to invest their money in Audie Crooks. I mean, that's just what you have to do. And Emily Ryan's going to get paid again, and Kelsey Jones and a couple of the other freshmen that played more than this girl are going to get money, and then they're going to go sign some transfers. It's reality, and it costs money. And both the men's and women's, we can all not like it or whatever, but that's reality. Money talks, and you do have to play. I mean, I really believe that you want to play and you need to play, and that's the positive of the transfer portal.
It's good and bad to it. It's a mess right now. It needs some guidelines. It needs some rules put in place, but it does give players an opportunity to maybe go to a different school where they can get more playing time. But also it brings in, if they don't get their way too, there's the flip side of it that maybe players aren't working as hard as they should. So it's a mix, like anything.
Yeah, I mean, here's how I see Omaha's career going out. 1 year at Iowa State, he's going to go down a level. He's going to go to somewhere like Drake. I'm not saying he's going to Drake, but a school like Drake, and he's going to be really, really good. And he's going to go right back up to Power 5, Power 6, whatever you want to call it, and going to get paid a lot of money and have a good career. So he's going to be at least at 3 schools, is my projection.
3 schools and a lot of dollar bills coming his way, most likely.
Absolutely. And then he'll go to the NBA, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So that's probably enough of the men's talk. 5-10 minutes there. The story is Caitlin Clark. And then secondary is the Hawkeyes, but it is Caitlin Clark. And the difference in the men's and women's is the stars shine bright.
Yeah, I mean the stars are driving it, and some people have been talking. With the women's game, these girls have been at the programs for multiple years, so we know who they are now, right? We're familiar with the story. And Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, if we're getting into that game, both showed up.
Oh, and then you look at the game after. Juju Watkins did not have her best game, but Paige Buchers did. And I saw a stat of the 4 Final Four teams, and NC State's a little bit of the outlier, but they had the number 28 recruit in the country in 2000 when all these girls, they're all the same age. Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, and Paige Buchers are all the same age. And then the other one is the really tall girl, and I have a hard time saying her name, from South Carolina.
Yeah, I know it.
But Buchers was number 1 player in the country. Clark was the number 4 player in the country. And then the big girl from South Carolina was number 5. So what's happened is those girls have produced. You go back to 2020 and you look at the top 4 recruits in men's basketball. They've all I don't even know who they are. One, that's the issue with men's basketball. I don't even know who they are. And then I guarantee maybe one of them's at the same place they went to. And then a couple of them are probably in the NBA as backups, and I don't know their names.
Right.
That's the problem. But we know the women's basketball game and the stars show out. And we've talked about this for weeks. Caitlin Clark does not disappoint. When it is time to shine, she's even on games we think, and they talk about she didn't play very good. You look at her stats, 25, 10, and 6. That's a bad game for her. She doesn't have 8 points. She never, I mean, I'm not going to say never, but she just never does.
You're right. She never really has a bad game, and you said it perfectly. A bad game for her is like 25 and 10, which is a damn good game for just about anybody in the country. So, yeah, that LSU game, I think I'm still shaking from it a little bit. That was a nerve-wracking one because I know when the bracket first came out, I was probably like a lot of people in Iowa. It's like, we're going to probably have to play LSU again. That's most likely going to happen, and it's going to suck if they beat us. And then a day before the game, after Iowa beat Colorado, I watched the LSU Mid-Tennessee State game, and then I watched South Carolina kind of struggle versus Indiana a little bit, or Indiana was within 4, and then Oregon State, I think, had South Carolina within 4 points with like 4 minutes left. So it kind of gave me a better feeling that, South Carolina and LSU, they're not unbeatable. We are a number 1 seed. So I had a little bit more confidence going into the game than I expected pre-tournament. And Caitlin Clark showed out. Angel Reese had a really good first half. The second half, whether it was her ankle injury or Addison O'Grady, was probably the underrated player of the game for the Hawkeyes. She did a really good job. So, yeah, it was mostly Caitlin, but we had a few other girls step up too, which we need to beat these really good teams.
And you've talked about this. but the injury to Molly Davis has made this team better. I truly believe that. Sydney Falter is a better player than Molly Davis and has helped this team. And you hit that the moment it happened. And I wanted to say that you did a good job there. But Sydney Falter is the difference in Iowa getting to the Final Four when many people didn't think they would. Didn't think they'd get a number one seed. They turned it around. They played, and I think we touched on it last week also, that we thought it would be good for them to get away from Iowa City. And I think it was. They played much better. I think those first two games, West Virginia and Holy Cross, everybody was just so tight because they knew the end was coming. And now they know the end is coming, but the end is awesome. You know, whether they win Friday night or they win the national title or lose in the national title game, the ending is awesome. Ending in the Final Four, they're a number one seed. They're going to be I assume they're going to be favored against UConn. That's all you can ask. You're good. That's all you can ask for. And then if they can win and they go play South Carolina, and I truly believe they can win it. If Caitlin Clark plays like she did against LSU, they can win because they have the best player. It's not close. And now here as a Hawkeye fan, and I think I'm going to put this up as the poll. I heard this the other day. I think it was on Murph and Andy. This is a good question. Iowa wins the national championship, but next year's football team has to suck. Like go 4-8. Do you trade it?
On me. I'll sign up for that right now.
Right. I agree. All right. And so maybe you go even more the next two football seasons have to suck.
If Iowa could win the national championship this year in the women's basketball tournament, I'd take the next 5 years being bad at football.
Yeah. I mean, it's not realistic.
It's easy to say that. Yeah, it's easy to say that right now because we're close, but I think I would just to get to experience that from a fan's perspective to see them host the trophy. I'd take 5 years of mediocre or bad football.
And that's because realistically in the what we would call main sports, which is men's and women's basketball and football, Iowa State, realistically, probably in our lifetimes, will never win a national championship. Iowa obviously made the national title game last year. Obviously has a good chance to win it this year. Do you trade it? Football, it's going to take all kinds of things to happen. Not that they can't. They haven't even got to the playoff yet. You got to get now easier to get to the playoff now, and you win a couple games. But the underdogs are not as successful in football over the course of, you might get that underdog to beat that first round game, but then when you go play the SEC champ Alabama that next round in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl or however they're going to do it, that's going to be a tough game. Much more than basketball because it just takes a different mindset, different everything. It's just a different caliber of athlete that Alabama has compared to most Cinderellas.
For Iowa State football, basketball is easier because it's 5-on-5. And if you have a player, men's or women's, that gets hot, one or two players shooting the ball, well, you can beat anybody just about. In football, that's 11-on-11, and you've got really big NFL dudes on the lines, and some of the other teams don't. And that's really the difference.
Right. And Iowa State, I mean, I think if they would have, I think they had the ability to maybe get to the Final Four. Now, they were in a tough draw. If they would have beat Illinois, I don't think they would have beat UConn. You never know. But that's the one thing Iowa State doesn't have. And maybe they don't have the guy. They don't have a first-team All-American. They're not going to have a first-team All-American next year. Lipsey, maybe that next year as a senior could get close to that. But they got to have a season where they're top 5 all year. Don't lose any games they're not supposed to. But I still don't see him as a first-team All-American guy. I think he was some type of All-American this year, but third team of USA Today or whatever. And it does take, like Zach Edey's the best player in college basketball. That's why Purdue is there. And then the transition to the NBA, that's a whole different discussion. But that's the women have Caitlin Clark is the best player. Paige Buchers is the best player. South Carolina is the best team, and it's not close. They're the best team. But anytime you have the best player, whether it's UConn that wins or Iowa, both of them have a fighting chance. Absolutely.
It would be a tough one. Paige Buchers is she's an equal to Caitlin. I think Caitlin's better more consistently, but Paige is a type of girl that can go for 30 and 10. I think she's stronger at the rim than Caitlin is. Probably a little bit safer with the ball. She actually has a higher percentage, 3-point shooting percentage. I think Caitlin's more dangerous from all over the court, obviously, but she's the type of girl that if she goes for 30 and 10, we're going to need that from Caitlin too to match it, which Caitlin typically does, as we've talked about. But I think Iowa can win the game. One difference is we talked about too last year when Iowa beat South Carolina in the Final Four. It was such a Herculean effort by Caitlin Clark. There was only one day off in between.
Right.
So it was tough to go really back-to-back performances, especially the way LSU was shooting. I think having a few days off now is important and good for Iowa.
Yeah. I mean, for Iowa to beat UConn tomorrow night, I do think Caitlin needs 32 or more. I really think so. I don't think she has to get to 40. If she gets to 40, I think they do win. And maybe it's a lot like the LSU game where it got a little hairy in the fourth quarter, but overall it was really not in doubt. I think it got to 4. They were up 10 or 11 at the quarter. I think LSU hit 2 shots in a row, maybe a 3 and a 2 to get it to 6, and maybe they got it to 4 at one time. But it was never a one possession game, I don't believe, in the fourth quarter. And that's the one thing that did worry me with the Ohio State and Nebraska losses, where they had the double digit fourth quarter lead and they sat on the ball during those 2 games. I truly think that. And it came back to get them. And then if you watch that game against LSU, the announcer was saying they were going too fast. But I think they learned their lesson. Like, I do think a couple of those shots were early. They didn't need to take them. But I think they had learned from those 2 losses, you got to keep playing. Iowa's a fast team. That's how they play. Kate Martin takes it in transition. Caitlin Clark is going to cross over and shoot a 30-foot 3 in the first 5 seconds. That's how they play the game. And I think you can't change it. If you go down, you go down, but you can't change the way you play.
I'm glad they stayed aggressive or semi-aggressive there in the fourth quarter. You talked about the losses that they had. They learned their lesson. So I was happy with that. Sitting on the ball that just gives LSU too much of a chance. Iowa's at their best when they're running and gunning. It was tied at 45-45, I think, at halftime. It really felt like Iowa had a lead, though. Iowa felt like the better team throughout the game, and obviously they were. The only complaint I really had was at about the 2-minute mark, LSU starts running the full court press, and Iowa turned it over 2 or 3 times, I think it was, and Lisa Bluter never took a timeout. We had 4 of them. And I'm in my hotel room in Denver by the airport getting ready to fly out the next day, and I've got a towel. I'm screaming in this towel because I'm trying not to bother people in the rooms next to me. I'm like, just use a timeout. We've got 4 of them. That was my only complaint in the game. I mean, you got 4 timeouts. Take a timeout, get the team collected. Everybody knows their assignments on how to break the press. Just remind everybody. And for some reason, we didn't use a timeout. I think Caitlin called one with like 50 seconds left or something finally, but that was my only frustration with the game.
And they did, and this is the rule differences in men's and women's, where you call the timeout in the backcourt, you can choose to advance it. And once they started calling timeouts, they did it every time, because then you can't set up the full court press. And even if you do turn it over or whatever, they got to go the length of the court and take 3-4 seconds to score. So they weren't stuck doing the press the entire game like a men's team would.
You're right. That is a difference. Once the timeouts were called, then you can advance it forward. But no, a pretty clean game. Caitlin was a story, but Kate Martin had a big game. So did Sydney. Stolke got in some foul trouble, but like we said, Addison O'Grady came in, and I think she had 5.
Yeah, the unsung hero of the game, and you talked about it earlier. She played really well against Angel Reese, as good as you can do. You're not gonna stop her. Let's talk about the next thing is Van Lith covering Caitlin Clark, and they made a big point of it. The Van Lith is only like 5'6",